All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Cupola Conversations. My name is Chris Stansberry. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs and the moderator for today's program. Our program is called Racism and Violence Against the Asian Community. And while many may believe that this is a program that's in response solely to what took place on the attacks of 8 people in Atlanta just less than 2 weeks ago, when in fact, that is only one hate incident out of more than 3,800 that have taken place in the last year against the Asian American Pacific Islander community, sometimes referred to as AAPI. And that 3,800 that's really only the ones that reported, which really tends to mean that there's a lot more out there that we don't know. More than 500 hate incidents have occurred in 2021 alone. This is not a one-time isolated situation, and that's why we're having this conversation today. Racism against Black and brown people goes back hundreds of years. History has shown demonstrated acts of violence and racism against the Asian community dating back to the 1800s. It peaked at times throughout history after World War I and the Vietnam War, and even more alarming, 2/3 of the hate incidents that tend to occur against women as the target. Yesterday, President Joe Biden, after taking some heat for some inaction, announced a new action in response to anti-Asian violence, xenophobia, and bias. Going back to March 19th, the president said, in part, too many Asian Americans have been walking up and down the streets and worrying, waking up each morning the past year feeling that their safety and the safety of their loved ones are at stake. They've been attacked, blamed, scapegoated, and harassed. They've been verbally assaulted, physically assaulted, and killed. His actions yesterday include reinstating and reinvigorating the White House initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, with a focus on anti-Asian bias and violence. Also includes funding for AAPI survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, creating a COVID-19 equity task force to address xenophobia against Asian Americans, and establishment of a Department of Justice cross-agency initiative to address anti-Asian violence. So as we process this information and I get ready to bring in our panel of students, faculty, and staff, one, I'll tell them, get ready. We're going to fire questions at you that I've got here, but we've also got some that are going to be watching. And if you want to add a question into the chat, you look up and you see the little question mark up at the top up there. You can type that into the chat. We've got folks that are here in the room that are going to kind of be monitoring those questions, and they'll feed some of them to me. Just know that we may not be able to get through everybody and every question into that, but we'll do the best we can to get some of them going. So let's start with some brief introductions from the panel. They'll introduce themselves. And I want to start with Zazan and Stacy, 2 of our students, then Dr. Kang, Ms. Jacobs, and Ms. Yan. So again, please introduce yourself in about 30 seconds or so after your introduction. The first question is, what was your immediate reactions to what happened in Atlanta less than 2 weeks ago? And how has it changed, if at all, in the days since? Again, we'll start with Zazan.
Hi, my name is Zizan Jiang. I'm a second-year master student of geography at ECU. I'm also the president of the Chinese Students and Scholars Association. Thank you.
And so if you will, Zazan, answer that question for me, your initial reactions after Atlanta, and then have your feelings changed at all since then?
Okay, so for me, I was very shocked about this at the beginning of the semester, beginning of this event, because it's a severe violence event for Asians. And when I was outside for shopping or outdoor activities these times, I have to pay more attention to people around me, to see if they were staring at me or something. I mean, this is a disaster for the Asians. So. And it has created a lot of, situations for us. So yeah, I hope we could solve this problem very soon.
Thank you. Stacy.
There we go. Hi, my name is Stacy Stanford, and I am a case manager over in the Dean of Students office. I'm also a doctoral student in our educational leadership program here at ECU as well. And I think when I first heard about what had happened, my initial thought was the sadness, and it also was kind of a tipping point for me, because this is something that as an Asian female I have experienced my whole life, and it was just that point that tipped over for me that fear almost. 2 nights ago, my house was actually vandalized. Rocks were thrown and windows were broken. And when we checked around, our house was the only one on the street that had impacted. And for me, that was very scary because I was at the house when this happened. And my first thought was, is this because of my race? Am I being targeted? And I have young children. So my first thought is fearful for my children as well. And as the panelists before me said, going out in public, you look, you make sure it's okay, and you kind of keep your head down. So that's kind of been my experience so far.
Thank you, Stacy, for sharing that. And I'm very sorry that happened. Dr. Kong, next, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeanette Kong, and I'm an associate professor at the School of Communications. And this is my 11th year at ECU, and I'm Korean American. After the Atlanta incidents, and the first emotions that I felt is resentment, anger, and well, it's been a while since I kind of collect these incidents case by case since the COVID-19. Because every day there are certain level of anxieties out there in everyday life. Yeah, on the strolls or the grocery stores, I paid extra attention. Also, I can feel that somebody is staring at me. It was not verbalized, but that there is a feeling and the very unpleasant feelings circulating around the daily life. So from the Atlanta incidents, I thought enough is enough. Yeah, this is the times to take actions. And I believe that these all incidents really galvanize the Asian American community in the U.S.
Thank you, Jenna. I appreciate that. Toya.
Yes, my name is Toya Jacobs, and I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Program Manager in the Office for Equity and Diversity. I'm an alumna of ECU twice, and I've been employed, tomorrow will be 21 years. I've been employed by the university. And the Atlanta incidents made me very upset. It made me sad that in 2021, people would be targeted because of who they are. And how it's changed from that anger and sadness is wanting to support the Asian American and Pacific Islander community more than I've ever done before. And that's where I'm at now is, once you have to push through the initial emotion, but you've got to get to work and help make this a more inclusive and equitable community.
Thank you, Toya. We've also got Lu Yao. I'm going to let her, she's on the phone, so unfortunately you get to look at me while she's talking on the phone, but Lu Yao, if you would also do an introduction for yourself and answer that first question for us.
Sure. So everyone, even though you can't see my face, my name is Lu Yao Yan. I'm a principal for the Greenville Chinese School. Also, a full-time profession is managing a law firm in Greenville. So my first reaction to the gun violence in Atlanta was I was very shocked. I felt very sad. So I went to actually read, the profile of each victim to understand what kind of life they were living and what their families like. And I feel more like angry and upset. And but then as some panelists mentioned before, I think those anger and the frustration led to determination here in my mind that we Asians would no longer just be silent, and we need to speak out and really stand up for the community. So personally, I think what changes for me because of that gun violence is I start to get very conscious of myself being an Asian and being a Chinese specifically. I remember right after the gun violence, I went to a grocery store, and before I step into the door, I just unconsciously actually pull out my mask more to cover my face because I'm afraid, what if there's a mass shooting or physical attack like talking toward me because they see your Asian face. But most time people are actually very friendly, but that thought has reminded me that like some changes had already taken place in my head and in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you all for answering that first question. And again, part of Cupola Conversations is asking difficult questions and addressing difficult topics. And so it is difficult for our panelists. I do appreciate their honesty and their candor. And I'm a firm believer in that if we're never going to be able to find solutions if we don't really look at the situation we're facing. And so one of the questions as I go forward here, I want to start off with Zazan to ask this question, but then any of the other panelists, Stacy or Dr. Kong, anybody that wants to answer this is welcome. We've heard over the presidential election cycle that race was a big topic that went back and forth, and that COVID-19 was and there was a lot of blaming and shaming that went tied to coronavirus. In some cases, people would call it the China virus. And so I'm interested in the last year, Zazan and then others, did you notice an increase or a rate of more concern or alarm on your behalf in the last year?
Well, so for the last year, I didn't notice much because of the virus, except for the people call it Chinese virus, something like that. But before, except for that, I didn't notice anything very special. The virus, the effect of the virus may mainly, influence most of the people, not only Asians, but also Americans, right? But also a lot of people, shops have been robbed or something like that. So, the virus itself may not be influence only our Asians. So, in this year, things are different. One of the members of my organization, who is also a friend of mine, told me an incident happened to him a week ago, not a year. He lived in Whitehall, near the campus tower, and one day when he turned to 5th Street for about 10 meters, a car passed by and several teenage boys yelled at him and then drove away. Although he didn't hear clearly what they were shouting, he was scared at that time. So when he told me this, I was thinking that was this a hate behavior against Asians, or these teenagers were just acting rudely to anyone they don't like on the street? I'm not sure. But one thing is certain, that the virus itself may not have such a huge impact, because I haven't heard any story like this last year, but I heard this one a week ago, right? So, he will feel unsafe to take a walk along outside the campus after this incident. So,
yeah,
and so that's my thought. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Stacy already shared a story. You've shared a personal story. Dr. Kong, you're in communications. The world we live in right now, it doesn't always have to be verbalized or somebody doing it. We live in a world now where social media, online presence, you've been pretty outspoken on and been putting things out there into the community. But I think that's also a place where we look on the flip side. People can spew their hate there too, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, aggressions, especially against Asian, is not new, to be honest with you. Those old behaviors is so much American. When I experienced a subtle level of like ignorance, microaggression, or discriminations, is very subtle, so you cannot notice it at the moment. So after that, you ponder like what happens to you, and then you suddenly realize that was repercussions towards you, and that those all angers are internalized onto you, and then you blame yourself. I should have done this, I should have done that, and then like all those angers or experience can be individualized and then internalized. And how can we tell all this experience to whom? And those all microaggressions, such as I can't understand you, or flip side is your English is so good, or can you speak Chinese, what is the context? I mean, I know there's no evil intentions on that comments, but still those ignorance is hurting. And also, so whenever bad things happens in community or the society level, certainly the Asians becomes the target of all the blames, because people don't perceive us as a inside member of the community for some reasons. We really need to think about what caused that misperception.
Thank you for that. Toya, I want to come your way with this next question because I know that you have done a lot as far as bias and microaggressions training and conversations. I've had the pleasure of being a part of that. I know one of the things you like to do is sit back, listen, process, and then kind of deliver some thoughts. So originally have a question about microaggressions and bias in and out of the classroom, but I want to stop and pause and ask a different question. Just from what you've heard in the first 10, 12 minutes of this conversation, process that for me from somebody who's used to dealing with bias and microaggressions, and just kind of what jumps into your head.
What jumps in my head, especially after Dr. Kong, is that we have to educate people, but people have to be willing to be educated. And people have to come to the table, whether it be to my training or one of our programs that's being put on, that people have to be open to learning, and they have to be open to know that they don't know everything, that everything doesn't have to be based in white supremacy. You know, we haven't talked about that, but what I'm hearing is the system of white supremacy. The system is embedded in every institution in America. People should be able to go to the grocery store. People should be able to sit in their home with their children. People shouldn't be asked to speak Chinese. Dr. Kong is Korean. You see what I'm saying? People have to really take a look at themselves. From what I'm hearing, people have to take a look at themselves. The individuals on this panel are not seen as being a part of the community. Dr. Kong mentioned that. They're just as much a part of the community as everyone else. I know that Dr. Kong and I have had conversations, and one thing I'd like to bring up to make sure that people understand is that Asians are contributors to our community. They're a part of our community, and they shouldn't be treated as silent partners or outsiders to our community. They have just as much rights as everyone else in the community. So what I'd like to offer as just sitting here as a trainer and facilitator is that I see the pain, I see the misfortune of what they've had to deal with, and I want to work with Intercultural Affairs, Student Affairs, the Chinese Student Scholars Association to make sure that we're giving everyone the knowledge, skills, and abilities to change our interactions on this campus and in the city of Greenville. I know the Chinese school happenings very well. So that's what I see, Chris.
Yeah, and so Toya, real quick, going right back as a quick follow-up to that would also be things that happen in a classroom, things that happen, either interactions, and Dr. Khan kind of mentioned that some of the things that she shared that are stories and things that people saying, you speak English very well, or can you speak Chinese, that can very likely happen in a classroom. Yeah. What advice for students in the classroom or faculty maybe to kind of de-escalate situations would you offer up?
Absolutely. So first we have to be cognizant of ourselves and the language that we use with other people. We have to realize that what we say is not always what we intend, but we have to take ownership for how the person receiving it takes that information. So one, have open and honest conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the classroom on a continual basis, not just when something happens, because as you notice, when something happens, we all had very different emotions. And those emotions are then going to leak into those conversations, into the classroom. So be honest, be truthful, speak from the I, and make sure that if someone tells you something, that you believe what they're telling you not try and dissect what they just told you to be a problem that they have to deal with. We have to look within ourselves and look for opportunities to treat people fairly.
Lu Yao and then Dr. Kong, Lu Yao with the Greenville Chinese School, it's a different age of student, not college kid type situation. Talk about how those types of topics get addressed in the classroom at your school.
Sure. So with the pandemic and the COVID going on, our school actually went on virtual. What I think is this kind of topic is really hard to, to talk to the kids, because our kids are aged like in between like 5 years old all the way to about 14 years old. And as kids, they probably don't see, discrimination or that sort of, being treated differently as racism, because they don't understand that concept yet. They might sometimes complain to their parents like, oh, they look at me differently. So we are trying to just, ask our teachers, maybe, bring up the topic instead of using the racism, this like the hard word. The teachers are trying to really, trying to educate them how to deal with this situation. If they meet with this situation, what kind of resources or who can they go to? They can talk to the teachers about it, and trying to bring them. Also, we are trying to educate them different type of cultures, and to teach them, okay, what is it like to in another culture? What is it like, for people speaking different language? So I think, as Noya said, education is so important, a foundation. That's something that we need to kind of lay the foundation early on to educate our kids. It's to just treat people with respect and try to put yourself in their shoes and understand them. Yeah.
Janae, for you, I know you wanted to weigh in on that, and I was going to come back to you and see what you have seen play out inside your classroom, but go ahead and feed off of what Lu Yao was talking about.
Okay, maybe as a parent, my kids' experience would be more helpful for you understand what it means to teach the minority identity. So last summer, when our society was like swirled by the Black Lives Movement, I happened to discuss about the George Floyd incidents with my daughter. She is now like 10 years old. And she all of a sudden shows the very sympathetic emotions during the conversations. So I stopped her like, hey, because I noticed that she looks at those whole incidents as a just observer, somewhat like white people's perspective. So I wanted to correct that perspective, like say like, hey Esther, like no, we are minorities, so you do not put yourself onto the white people's perspectives. We just look like George Floyd. He doesn't get those situations. So I have to explain all those discriminations, history of Asian American. Can you imagine how a 10 years old observe all those historical facts? It is not taught at the school. In public school, they celebrate Black History Month in February. So they talk about all Black or the white or those civil rights movement. One day kids back home and asked me, so are we white? I said no, obviously we don't look like white. And then she asked me, so what are we? I took a pause. We are people of color? I really did not like that word because how do you categorize people by the skin color? I never defined myself as with my skin colors, back then. And my daughter Esther took a pause and told me, I don't like it. And those all conversation happens last year in 2020. And sometimes like she talked to me like, I don't like to being a minority. I don't want to be a minority. What does that mean? I mean, I know like the Black community has to have the discussions with the kids because they encountered unjust situations. Why do we need to teach our kids about these like weird situations? Is this antidote so that they don't get hurt when they encounter this weird situation? No, I don't think that this is right. This is not right.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And we did get a question that came in. Stacy, I want to pose it to you. If you have a question in the chat, we got close to 100 people that are participating in the program, which is fantastic. We want to keep the conversation going. You have a question in the chat. We're getting some of them coming in. So Stacy, this is one of the questions that came in with all the stress recently and over time impacting Asian Americans. How do you think it is impacting the mental health? And culturally, it may be looked down upon to seek counseling in some cases.
That's a good question, and something I don't think I mentioned earlier is I have a very unique perspective, as well as I'm actually a transracial international adoptee. And so when all this happened, it's very confusing, especially growing up. And as Dr. Kong had just said, that am I white? Because my parents are Caucasian, and so growing up in that, it was confusing because I had people, would come up to me and ask, well, what are you? Or those aren't your real parents, or what, where are you from? And so I don't have that same connection, unfortunately, but I would say it is as a whole for mental health and, in the work that I do in the office, that sometimes it is not viewed as something that is openly talked about. Again, that is situational, and family to family. So I don't like to make a blanket statement, of course. But I think someone had mentioned earlier the silence, that this is something that we stay silent about, the microaggressions. I've heard several times, people come up to me, bow to me, will say ni hao or konnichiwa, and I'm Korean, and so I don't know any of that. And so it is one of those things where, for Asian Americans dealing with this and kind of putting a smile on their face and kind of going along with it, it's just something I know I've learned to do. I'm sure others have as well. But as far as for the mental health, I'm not sure. I would guess that there is maybe some barriers with that. So like I said, again, this is just my perspective.
Well, I appreciate that. And we have a couple questions that have come in about resources, and I want to get to that a little bit later on about ways that the community can provide support and more specifically to people that are looking for outreach of where to go. So we'll get to some of that in just a little bit. So I'm going to ask a difficult question, and I realize it's a difficult question, and everybody is either here connected with ECU as an employee or as a student or both in some cases, and then also Liu Yao with the Greenville School as far as the community. But here's my question. We had a conversation in Global Affairs, and John Resnick shared that this conversation happened last week as a part of a program they had with students and faculty. And one topic that came up is East Carolina University a welcoming environment to international students and to the AAPI students in particular? And I think there was a lot of emotion that went into those responses. And so for our panelists, I'd love everybody to answer that, and maybe Zazan, you can kick us off. Feeling like this is an open, constructive conversation. We're not throwing jabs or trying to do things. We are trying to make ECU more inclusive. And I think that's one of the aims that we have long since said. And I know that's a big part of our mission, is to become an inclusive community. But Zazan, and then Dr. Kong, and then Stacy and Toya, how welcoming to international students is ECU, and maybe what could we do a little bit better?
In my opinion, that the ECU has done a lot to our international students. I received a warm welcome at the beginning of my entering the ECU, and my classmates and professors are all kind, very kind to me, and they are willing to answer me every question on something. So I mean, I didn't receive any discrimination at ECU, and I didn't hear any members from my organization have such a feeling either. So I think ECU has done a great job in this. So I have nothing to complain about.
Stacy?
I think from a staff and a student, dual perspective, I feel that it has been welcoming, but I also recognize there's always work to be done. There's always more ways to be inclusive, to reach out, to listen, and actually hear what the person is saying, and act on it. So like I said, I feel from my dual role that it has been a good experience. But again, I feel like there's plenty of work that we still can do.
Dr. Kong?
Yes, well, I feel all those resources for the diversities is focused on African American issues plus LGBT issues. So staff level, policy levels looks fantastic, but still Asian voices are lacking. So you look at the Asian language programs that is under the foreign language program. I don't see anything. There used to be like the Japanese program. Now I can spot German, French, Spanish dominant. As a result, our students are more likely to show interest in going to European countries for the study abroad because they want to practice the languages over there. And then perhaps they want to see or enjoy the culture of their ancestors. So study abroad program is predominantly towards like European countries, and that's popular. Those programs has no problems to recruit the students who wants to go to the study abroad program. But because of the lack of Asian languages program, and our ECU students has no exposure to the Asian culture or countries, so the lack of interest in the study abroad programs to the Asian countries, and if you need to develop those programs to the Asian countries, yeah, that's the real pain. And then you are like the talking to vain. That's the real problem. And also multicultural center. I'm not sure. I never feel like I am connected with those multicultural center. I used to be an international student, so I have gone towards like international affairs. But when it comes to the multicultural centers, and I don't see any Asian faces over there. Even for the banners of the advertising materials, I don't see any faces. Even in the jumbotrons on the student center, have I noticed any Asian faces over there? Are there any chance for the Asians members to be a face of ECU? Upper level administrators and the leaders should really need to think about that. So, I mean, this is very complex problems. So with that being said, Asian students, I mean, future students are less likely to come to here because there may be some messages that we put out there, like Asian faces not here, so you're not welcoming. Yeah, that is not be obvious, but there is subtle level of those climates out there. We need to really notice what's going on there. We need to carefully listen to Asian students. We have only 3% of the Asian students over here. We need to, be careful and then actively recruit the Asian students and then raise the recognitions on the Asian studies. That's my opinion.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the candor that you deliver there, and I think it's well received. I think it needs to be taken to the next step. Is the question is, where do we go? I think that kind of fits into the kind of going your way, Toya. With that would be, you and I have had conversations in different manners with whether it's African American students, Hispanic students, people that want to see themselves on a campus. They want to see themselves in the staff. They want to see themselves in the faculty. Diversity and inclusion, obviously, as you said, is a big component of your job. How do you take this forward, not you individually, but you and your office folks, to start doing some of the things that maybe Janae was mentioning?
Absolutely. A lot of what I hope will happen in the future and what has to happen in the future across our campus is to build capacity. We want to build capacity not only for people having the knowledge, skills, and abilities not to be racist and sexist and homophobic, but we want to make sure that people have the tools needed to effectively recruit faculty, staff, and students from the AAPI community. And once they get here, work to keep them here. Like Dr. Kong said, where are the faces in the leadership? When you look at the individuals that report to the chancellor or the people that report to the people that report to the chancellor, where is AAPI represented? Representation matters. We want to make sure that we are pipelining not just our students, but staff. And I think staff are often forgotten in the numbers. I know that the Office for Equity and Diversity looks at the numbers. We have the dashboards, we have all these surveys and all this data that helps inform our programming. But one voice on this campus, regardless of the demographic, that I think is missed is the staff voice. Because students and faculty depend on staff for the university to run, and that's often forgotten. So I would love to see more pipeline programs for staff of diverse populations. Representation matters in the classroom, outside the classroom. I love that the Chinese school is here. My neighbor, Zhao Ming, used to be very involved. He left and went to Chapel Hill. And here's a part of the action. I know this isn't your question, but I texted him to make sure they were okay. I remember when their daughter used to kick the soccer ball up against the house for years, and now she's in college, and their little boy Ben and my wife, who is a physician. I'm like, when Atlanta happened, my heart went out to Jamin and his family. I mean, they lived across, literally, you roll down my driveway and you roll into theirs, literally across the street. And he was very vocal about Chinese affairs here on this campus. In every avenue that he could talk about it, he did. And so that's what we need. I know that, and Janae, Dr. Kong, I really want to talk to you more about how we can make those voices amplified, how we can center those voices, because they do matter. So that's what I hope for. I think we have to build capacity across the institution where we're thinking about the AAPI community in the classroom, outside the classroom, on the board of trustees, every aspect of this institution. Let's take a look at it and find ways to increase representation.
I'll add to your personal story, Toya. He actually gave me this tie. Believe it or not, it was a gift that he gave me about a year ago.
I miss them so much.
Yes, I miss that he's not here, but I know he's going to do great things up in Chapel Hill. Dr. Kong, do you want to jump in there?
Oh, yes. I would love to make one more suggestions, like how can we make an impact in this community with these racial issues? Well, one of the ECU's motto was regional transformation. I love it. We need, if this Eastern NC needs ECU, and how can we bring that energy? How can we bring that energy and really transform these regions? We really need to think out of the box. Globalization is not the opposite side of the regional transformation. Bring the recognitions of the Asian community in student Eastern NC. We are the small number of people, but I know many of the Korean elders who have been living here more than 30 years. They are living history. they have a connections between like the Korean history and then Eastern NC. Why don't we train our K-12 teachers at this College of Education so to let them teach Asian American histories in the K-12 system, so that our the trained teachers can tell the story of the Asian American. So those history components must be added in the K-12 level curriculum. How can we make an impact? I mean, we have training power to educate our educators. Do you see this background?
Yeah.
This background is actually the soap advertisement, published in 1880s. So it's a soap advertisement, but the subtitle is "The Chinese Must Go." So that we can see those messages in a popular cultural level, those systematic racisms are embedded in our cultures. It is not being told. Like I said, February is Black Lives Matter History, March is the Women's History Month, right? And do you know when is the AAPI month?
May.
It's May. Yes, so yeah, thank you. It's May, but it is being called as AAPI Heritage Month. So there is a subtle nuance between history and heritage. And heritage, you see everything from the cultural lens. People enjoy already a lot of the Asian cultures. We need history. The Asian Americans who contribute to build this country. That's the missing piece.
Yeah, and I want to go to, because it's a nice segue, Dr. Kong, because you mentioned K-12. So I want to bring back in Lu Yao from the Greenville Chinese School, and I want to kind of pose this question your way. ECU is more than just a campus. It is part of the community. She was just talking about adding some of this into K-12 curriculum and even more teaching, I think, to Dr. Kong's point, teaching our teachers how to have these conversations. All forms of racism, not just anti-Asian, is a topic that needs to be addressed. How difficult is it to go into that? You're talking about 5-year-old to 14-year-old. That's got to be a delicate balance to try and incorporate a much needed topic, but at the same time, it's a challenge too.
Yes, it's certainly challenging because, the kids, they were not born with the concept of racism. So what have we been trying to do? Just, we ask the teachers maybe, introduce, maybe when they're teaching, especially with a 4 or 5 years old kid, you want to introduce, those visual things, like pictures, pictures of people from different ethnic backgrounds. So they're familiar with the faces, different colors, from the beginning of their life. And we encourage, to the students and the kids to, make friends with all kinds of, ethnic groups. So I think how the ECU can maybe improve the connections with the local language schools and different Asian groups. One way that maybe in the future, for example, Greenville Chinese School can collaborate with the ECU in certain type of, cultural exchange for our kids to learn more about what is like in ECU, and maybe also, you can bring the K-12 students in the K-12 program, maybe take them to the Chinese school and interact with the Chinese kids. And I know there's Korean language school as well. Maybe bring these K-12 teachers to us, and we can talk together. And I think with more opportunities of these type of cross-group interactions, and people exposed to different type of cultures, I think it's better for the environment itself.
Thank you for that. I want to transition just a little bit. So we've seen in some of our conversations, we had a whole summer themed of driving out darkness that was really talking about racism. And we've talked about LGBTQ, but both for Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ movements, it's been commonly discussed that it just can't be those pockets of folks that are making change. There's got to be allies. There's got to be other people that are willing to stand up and be part of this. And anybody that wants to, like I said, I can see you down at the bottom if you want to raise a hand or if you want to jump into this. Talk about either A, and I see Toya, I'll come your way first, ways in which you've either seen how allies work to support a movement, or B, maybe the importance of allies stepping up. Toya, I'll come to you first.
People in marginalized communities are tired. They're fearful. There's an added anxiety just in living in this world. So as you can see, the OED pledge to act against racism, this is a website. I'd like to share with you what the actual pledge is. 1, I believe that racism, discrimination, and injustice are real. Okay, it is real. Words, behaviors, practices, policies, and systems can all contribute to racial and social injustice. And believe that the impact of my words, actions, and policies is more important than the intent behind them. We have to create, value, and protect spaces for people of color. So that's what allies can do. Allies can listen, allies can believe what they hear, and then they can act. Without the action, nothing changes. So the way I see it is asking, like texting Jamin, is there anything that you need? Is your family okay? What can I do for you? Is an opportunity to show him that I have care and I have concern for him and his family. And to realize that allies are not, we just had this conversation at 2 o'clock. I can't say that I'm an ally. The community has told me that I'm an ally. And hopefully I will be an accomplice, because accomplices actually do something rather than just making a black face, a black square for your social media, or posting Black Lives Matter or Stop Asian Hate. No, what else are you going to do in addition to that? That is where allyship becomes accomplishment, and you're actually doing something to help someone that's different from yourself.
Janae, Stacy, Zazan, do any of y'all want to weigh in on that? Okay, well, we've got about, Dr. Kong.
Well, I got my U.S. citizenship in 2017. My kids, I have 2 kids that they are born here and then raised here. So they called Greenville and Eastern NC is their hometown. The only reasons that I pursue my citizenships was the voting right. I want my voices here. I don't want my kids to live like foreigners here. So I want them to thrive here. So I embedded myself to become an American citizen. I have no regret. Now I think I need to take actions to actively engage in the community level and also professional organizations. I believe in those institutional powers too. I can nurture my friends at the interpersonal level, but I realized that is not enough. I really appreciate ECU's prepared this conversational venue so that we can talk freely. And then this is one example that what we can do as an institution. It's uncomfortable, but we need to continue to talk. Yeah, that's my kind of final remark. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And actually, it's like you knew where I was going with this, because we're about running out of time, and I do want to go to a little bit of a conclusion here, and I want to give everybody an opportunity to weigh in on this, and we'll kind of wrap up as we started a little while ago, and we'll start with Zazan and Stacy and Janae, Toya, and Lu Yao on this. I will share that some at ECU are working to make their voices heard in support of AAPI, and Dr. Zvankovic, who's the Dean of the College of Health and Human Performance, and her college leadership actually sent out a letter to the college's faculty, staff, and students just last week. In that letter, the leadership denounced the violence in Atlanta. They acknowledged the violence increasing during COVID and recognized that some in their college are dealing with stressors of college life while facing anxiety and stress, with the number of anti-Asian incidents going up. Dean Z also shared a resource collection from the National Council on Family Relations, focusing on public health, social work, psychology, sociology, and more. I think these types of statements, as well as letters from chancellors and UNC systems and denouncing racism in its many forms, they are helpful. As several of you have said, though, actions is what's going to make the change here. So that's where I want to kind of wrap up. And again, I want to start with Zazan to say, let's look a year from now, 3 years from now, or 5 years from now. What are some of the action steps that we're going to need to take so that we can actually see positive change in this situation, and that 3 or 5 years from now, we're not sitting here having the same conversation again? Zazan?
Okay, so as an international student, I have encountered all the people I encountered at ECU, either faculty or students, are very friendly to us, but outside the campus, I'm not, because there's some robbery or something, like the story I told you before, right? Some teenagers yelled at a friend of mine. So I mean, maybe we could do something to secure the safety along the road. Some students have to walk to home instead of driving a car, right? And we feel very safe at the campus because we are all pirates, right? We have a recognition of ourselves, but outside the campus, others may not be regard you as a pirate, right? So I mean, ECU has done a lot. Just I said before, like you can see some tips against the racism in the school bus, right? We are equal. We are all pirates. That's I mean, maybe we could do some similar things, like along the road, like the 10th Street, right? We could build some, I mean, like I don't know, but some facilities that can remind people that we respect to minority groups, right? Something like that. So just like the slogans in the school bus, that's what I'm thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Stacy?
I think one thing to consider is impact versus intent. Your harmless joke is our reality. Your microaggressions of hearing on a constant basis, your English is, you speak English so well, or, the other things that you experience, just going to the store or in the classroom, that is our reality. And when we're told, don't be so sensitive about that. Listen to when we say that's hurtful. Please be willing to listen to us, because that is our experience. And when you brush it off as a joke, you're discrediting us, and it is what's kept us so silent, and that silence is deafening at times. So I think to move forward is listen, be willing to listen, be willing to hear when someone says that hurts and knows I won't say that again, or realize where that hurt is coming from. So I think that's a big thing that as a whole we need to work together on.
Yeah, Stacy, the vandalizing your house, having people yell at you from a car, that's reality, and that shouldn't be anybody's reality. Dr. Kong, how do we go forward? Where do we go from here?
I want to see more Asian students, and then I want to be reconnected with our Asian alums. They are forgotten populations. I bet they will be thriving somewhere else in America. To reconnect with them and then lift their soul, like the pirate soul, and then rebuild the pirate nations with Asian alums. That would be fantastic.
Thank you for that. Toya, where do we go? How do we make constructive change? How do we not revisit where we are right now? It's a conversation we've had in previous cupolas and conversations that you have every day. It's not about rewriting history. It's about making sure we don't repeat it. How do we go forward?
Absolutely. We have to continue to have these conversations, and I don't think we've had enough of these conversations with the AAPI community outside of the AAPI community. I want to make sure for us to move forward that we're having these conversations in mixed spaces so that the Asian voice is not silenced. Okay, I know that it's there. We will reach out to groups and organizations, but I would love to, like Zizan said, we need to make sure that Greenville and Pitt County begins to be a part of those conversations, because we're not in this protected bubble at ECU. You know, even students that live on campus have to go outside the campus. So town-gown relations, communication amongst and within all populations will move us forward. And like Stacey said, listen to people, know that they're telling you the truth, use your sphere of influence to then act. That is how we're going to move forward. And we have to get more Asian Americans in leadership roles, in faculty positions, and definitely at the leadership of the institution, because our students, faculty, and staff that come into ECU need to see themselves represented.
Toya, real quickly as a follow-up while you're there, if somebody on our campus had a concern, they want to report something, they don't know where to go. Mm-hmm. Tell me, if I'm a student, a faculty member, staff member, I had something happen to me and I need to tell somebody, where do I go?
Absolutely. To report concerns or acts against Asian American and Pacific Islanders or other forms of discrimination, please contact the Office for Equity and Diversity. Our telephone number is 252-328-6804, and our email address is oed@ecu.edu. And in some cases, we also work with the Dean of Students Office in Student Affairs.
I was going to say, Stacey, do you want to throw into how people can connect to your office real quick?
Oh, sorry about that. Trying to get my mute button off.
No,
absolutely. Okay. Please connect with our office. We have case managers here that will take reports. We've had it where faculty have reached out, or campus living, anyone that you feel comfortable going to if you don't feel directly going to our office or OED. But we are available. Our number is going to be 328-9297. Okay, and then our email is dos@ecu.edu.
Thank you very much for that, Stacey, and thank you for that, Toya, as well. I want to go to Lu Yao too. It was a couple of references to it's just outside of ECU's campus. It's part of the community. Where do we go as a Greenville community, Pitt County community, just kind of from your perspective? How do we make some change going forward?
Sure. So I think, ECU is a place where, you all train talent, like future talents for the community and for this nation and for international as well. So I think what ECU can play as well is to really, bring this diverse culture to the students and expose them to different, type of perspectives. And I would like to see more conversations like this happening, not only just within the AAPI community, but also, across different groups. And I actually used to work for another public university as well. I remember at that time, we had a lot of Asian students in that university. I remember I had a intercultural team, and every year we would celebrate, cultures through a large culture fair. What I want to see at ECU, I don't know if you currently already have it or not, I would like to see is something that a cultural fair, not only just about certain culture, but cultures that representing all the students and every single ethnic background they are from. So I think that kind of event will really, bring different perspectives to students and let them learn more about what is out there. I think community-wise, I would definitely love to see, ECU as a local leader, academic leader in this community to really, encourage more groups to have conversations, get together, have discussion groups and events that can celebrate the cultures and celebrate the history. Maybe sometimes like collaborate with the city to show like documentaries about Asian American histories, to learn more about, not only just Asian Americans, but also international cultures as well. I think that those will be some great programs and actions for future.
Thank you all for that. I really appreciate it. Zazan, Stacy, Janae, Toya, and also Lu Yao. Thank you all for being a part of this conversation. I think one of the things with Cupola Conversations is we bring these topics up. Please don't let it be the end of the conversation. Please try to find ways to continue them. We all have our own pockets and people that we talk to. Keep the conversation going. Make sure you're reaching out to resources on campus. The Ladonia Wright Cultural Center is a great resource for people that just don't know where to go to learn things. We've got, I've even heard discussions, and Toya may have heard some of this too. We've got a safe zone training. We've got a green zone training. There may be a need for some type of a cultural training where people can learn about all types of cultures. And so those types of actions, I think, lead to positive change. And that's where ECU can be a leader. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the 90+ folks that participated in the program. We hope you got something out of it. Until we talk again at another Cupola, please, everybody, stay safe and go Pirates.